Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Right, should we kick it off?
Please do, mate.
Steve, how are you doing, brother?
I'm very well, thanks, Pete. Happy New Year to you. Hope you had a really good Christmas and a Happy New Year.
I did, mate, yeah. We had some, I think yours is the second, which sounds harsh to say, I know, but I think the only reason yours is the second most listened to podcast is most people start, or if they scroll all the way back, they scroll all the way back to the beginning. So John McDonald is in the God knows how many thousands of things, but we've had so many emails, messages, we've actually had a few letters in, which was a bit random, about the podcast that we first brought on together. And I'm hoping, I know you had a few people sort of reach out to you, but how's the whole book launch going, and how was the first kind of experience with the podcast, I suppose?
That was really good. It's been what can I say? For an unknown book, it's been really successful. So it's a really difficult metric to measure because you're going up against impossible odds like Prince Harry's new book and things like that. So you look at all of the books that are in you've got Amazon is the only metric I can measure. I can get a report. It costs about 200 quid, and I think that's the only real way of telling it. I'm not suggesting for one moment that my publishers are going to be less than honest with me, but it is recommended that authors do get their own independent statistics. So I don't know what it looks at across the whole piece yet, but looking at Amazon, which is where the majority sell, it sells really well. So it was selling at times 30, 40, 50 a day, which were in the early days.
That's got to feel surreal.
Yeah, that was unbelievable for an unknown author. So I'm not going to name other books, but similar books, the Amazon ranking was generally around 100,000. Their book was the 100,000th best-selling, for example, right up to 300,000 consistently. Mine for a few months hung around 10,000. A few times when I did something like your podcast, it would drop down to about 2, 3, 4,000, which means it's selling somewhere in the region of between 25 and 50 a day, maybe. I think looking at a little bit of research I've done. So that wasn't going well. That was really going well.
Yeah.
I think on average now, when it peaks at around about 15,000, which is probably 6 or 7 a day, and then it sort of ebbs and it hangs around the 40,000 mark, which I assume is 2 or 3 a day. So I know 100,000 books is 1 a day. So, you know, it's hard to say, but for an unknown, it's really unfortunate because if it got the publicity, so if it got on Richard and Judy's book list, a book club, or the Daily Mirror book club, I suspect it would do really well. But it isn't. I don't get there. There's almost a glass ceiling. So if I ever find a way of breaking that glass ceiling, who knows?
I imagine
but in the
you
meantime,
probably have to pass people's palms with silver. Is there not a little bit of that?
I would imagine you do.
Well?
Yeah, you have to be known, or you have to be, and that's fair. You know, if it was about Katie Price's boobs, she's going to sell books, isn't she? Because
but she was a shit firefighter as well, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, she tried, but she was dog shit.
She did, yeah. But to be fair, for what I am an unknown. I suppose it would be fair to say I'm moderately well known in the UK fire service, but we are a small market. I'm no Andy McNabb, although I found a review on the publisher's website the other day from a woman. I've no idea who she is. I think she's a professional book reviewer, and she did put me in Andy McNabb's. She mentioned me in the same sentence as Andy McNabb, a firefighting version of what Andy McNabb did. So that was pretty impressive. It's a shame it doesn't follow all the way through. But you know what? It's done much better than I ever expected. It was something I wanted to do. I needed to do. In terms of its success, everyone who reads it seems to be really inspired by it. What has been really good is that a lot of people have written to me, emailed me, or left messages and said, do you know what? I was falling out of love with the fire service, with everything that's going on. but your book has reminded me how good it really is. What a great job it is. So I can't ask for anything more than that.
It's a massive pleasure to welcome our new partner to the podcast, Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, I've personally worn Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades, working operationally in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services throughout their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceed global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. It's a really exciting and humbling moment to be welcoming Gore-Tex to the family. And the best way for you to support the podcast is to go over and find out a little bit more about all of the partners that help bring this podcast to you. So expect a lot of things coming from us in the future as we work together as a partnership to help inform, educate, and protect professionals in the fire and emergency services. Gore-Tex, going further together. Now back to the show. They're the big ones that I always think, because like, I think for every one person that actually reaches out, for every one person that has the balls, the drive, the assertiveness, whatever, to send that message, to do whatever, there's probably, you could probably times that by 10, 15, 20, I don't know how many. For how many people read, it's a bit like social media, for an example. The amount of people that see something versus the amount of people that like it or comment on it or anything like that. Yeah. We have it with the podcast. So the amount of people that listen versus the amount of people subscribe, you have like I don't know what it is. I think it's 70% maybe of people even subscribe to the podcast versus the thousands and thousands and thousands that actually listen to it. So it's like, there's a balance between that. But then, like you say, every time you get that message, and I know we've exchanged a few because we get inundated with stuff either from your episode or from loads of different people, it does really just, it sounds like really corny, but it's a little bit like it's the oxygen to their flame when they're really struggling and they're having them shit days and they're going through this austerity, and you know there's a few whatever negative people on the station or on the watch. Inside, romantically, they still have that childlike love for parts of the job, but it's so easy to forget about that. But like what you said about it being a niche as well, I had to come to terms with it. Not come to terms with it, that sounds harsh, but like I had that realization when I was looking at, you know, some of the really salacious podcasts that are out there talking about, like you said, the breaking news of this, that, and the other. You can't realistically put yourself on the same spectrum of them, because my big passion and my big commitment is people in the first responder community, and predominantly, you know, firefighting content and firefighters. That is a small percentage of the entire population, but I know
absolutely,
it's the people that, you know, there are people that listen to this who genuinely actually will go over and buy and read your book. They will go over, you know, Lee Hosey Pickett's book, you know, the documents that we share. People actually go and look at it, go and read it. It's not just like entertainment for them. You know what I mean? There's almost a romantic side of it, but you also have to accept with that, you're not going to get the hundreds of millions of people. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But yeah, man, we've been absolutely inundated with, and that's why I kind of reconnected with you, because I was like, it'd be great to have you back, see how you found the whole experience. Did you find any part of it like you were coming out to sea naked, if you know what I mean? Because I know when you said when you were writing it, there'd be parts of you like, oh, you know, does it sound a bit like this or does it sound a bit like that? Because it's all true, and it's not like you've tried to romanticize it or tried to big up your role or anything like that. But there'll still be those people who are like, who's this wanker? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I haven't. If people have thought that and put the book down, I've not read about that. Everything I've genuinely read has been really honest. I did have some problems with quality control with the publisher. That's been dealt with now. If you look, the Kindle on Amazon is still showing as having issues. I'm told that's been fixed, but Amazon are a law to themselves. But one guy got on and did a really good review, then absolutely slated me. So I got back onto the publisher. Me and the publisher got into a bit of an argument about what an editor should do, because I didn't think the editor had done the job. But the long and short of it is, so this was weeks and weeks and weeks ago, well before Christmas. So anyone I had to actually sit down and spell check the whole book myself, which was incredibly difficult because you have to read it almost word for word, which is impossible to do in summary because I know the story. So you want to read ahead yourself because you know what's coming.
Yeah, your mind is jumping ahead and filling in the blanks before you've even got there. I
did find about 68 spelling typos and not spelling mistakes there, where when I typed the manuscript up, I typed a little bit, so my brain works quicker than my fingers can. So a typical one which came up all the time, which came up in the review, has been BEEN. I often spell that as BENE because my fingers work. So, and another one that came up, I was talking about a helicopter landing somewhere, and it said Polit instead of pilot. So I found about 60 odd of those mistakes, but I got into a debate with the publisher, and the publisher, to be fair, they held their hands up and said, actually, that's not good. We will, if you do the correcting, we will accept that, and we will change everything. We'll throw away all the copies we've got, and we will reprint free of charge. So that the quality control issues have all stopped now. So that's good. But in terms of, I did feel a little bit like, how will it be received? Will it be a little bit like coming out of the sea naked? But I haven't had any negative feedback. Awesome. Therefore, I'm relatively pleased. So I don't feel like that. Because had I not have wanted to tell the story the way I told it, then I wouldn't have done it. I had no axe to grind at all with the fire brigade. I might have some axes to grind today because it's almost 5 years on. And I think the fire brigade has gone, it's been over politicised because of Grenfell, because of the LFB cultural review. I think it is, particularly in London, it's got far too politicised. Therefore, I do have a problem with the fire brigade today. But when I wrote the book, I didn't have an axe to grind because I loved it. I had 31 years, best time of my life, tragedy, good, bad, and indifferent, but it was an absolute exceptional time. I couldn't have, pardon the pun, I couldn't have written the story in terms of my career better had I imagined it. I had a shaky start. That comes out in the book because I was a gobby little kid from a council estate. Didn't appreciate I was 19 years old when I went to my first station, and gobbing off to a load of guys who are in their late 20s and early 30s didn't necessarily endear me to them. That was immaturity on my part. But once I solved that, then from then on, it was pretty good. It was a good ride, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And I always used to say to people in my later years, if I ever met myself coming back round again, I probably would have punched myself on the nose because I wouldn't have tolerated someone like me all those years later. And so, hats off to my first colleagues. I did get the odd punch in the chest and kick. I was always threatened on the volley. It was only volleyball, funny enough. If you miss that shot again, I'm going to kick you in the throat. I always remember that line. No, you fucking won't. You will. If you miss that shot again, I'm going to kick you in the throat. Okay. But yeah, so it was so the story, I told the story. Some people are surprised. Some people thought I would have a point to prove. I don't know why they thought that, because I was fairly happy with, I weren't on the good side of the people at the top of the LFB because I have my principles, but that all come good with Danny Cotton. I think that final change in strategic leadership in my last couple of years meant that my last couple of years were settled in terms of there was no one out no one was particularly out to get me, because that gives an impression that I was more important than I was. But I've certainly ruffled a few feathers over the last 15 years, and for about 13 of those 15 years, often I'd find myself, and the book sometimes alludes to it, I'd often find myself, if I'd have kept my mouth shut, I might have been in a better position, but I didn't. So There you go. We are where we are.
Do you think a lot of people enter that stage a little bit later? I mean, we recently put out an episode with, I think he's station commander, James Ball, fascinating guy, ran the Marathon des Sables. He's very open about his own PTSD. And he said how the fire service had actually changed him, but for the negative. He was a very, not very successful, but he was a successful rugby star, for want of a better description, these kind of his words. But he said he was never quite good enough to make it to that next level. But then when he came into the service in his 20s, and as he moved through it, it was the treatment that he'd had from certain people. And in fairness to himself, he struggles greatly with his own mental health, but he felt like he didn't have that support around him. And now it feels like he's a hollow shell of his former self, which I've not experienced that personally myself, and that's not to say that there aren't thousands of cases like that, but it always really upsets me when I hear that, and it kind of echoes what you were alluding to about the cultural review, because when I read that, well, first of all, one of the things that came to my mind was I think it was a sort of a story you shared with me around someone you were managing once upon a time, a really impressive female station commander. I think this individual was, and obviously we won't say stations or names or anything, but they were trying to manage an underperformer, and it echoed aspects of that because I know that individual, she wasn't supported in the way that she did it, and it echoed aspects of that because I thought, there's no smoke without fire. There will have been some horrific things that had taken place that should never take place anywhere. But like when we spoke, I was like, really? That's not just bad morals and culture and in the fight. That's a fucking bad human being who's ever done that. And when I look at something like LFB, because it's so big, it's got whatever, I don't know, what is it, 5,000 stuff, 6,000, something like that?
5,600, something like that. Yeah.
That is, if you took 5,000 members of the public, and I know we're supposed to have a bit more of a diligent and effective screening process, but I'm like, you're always going to get one or two really bad apples. But how did you think about it? We're not having too much depth about it, but for someone that had given so much of their life and time, it must have been a tough little recollection.
It was. I mean, I've read the most salacious bits of it because, let's be honest, the most salacious bits are the bits that come out in the media.
Yeah.
I've got to say that is, I was a white male in the London Fire Brigade, and then to the last 5, 6, 7 years of my career, I was a white senior ranking middle-aged male, so heterosexual male in the fire brigade. So I was among the majority. I was one of the oldest, one of the longest serving, one of the most senior. Therefore, there was an element of the king, can't say the queen, God rest her soul anymore, but the king always smells new paint. So I don't doubt that there were circumstances when I turned up at various places where things seemed to be running well, because the boss is here. Of course, it's going to be like that. Having said that, I was always very familiar with people. I didn't hide away in my ivory tower. I used to spend a lot of time on station. All the time I could spend sitting around a mess table that's what I'd rather be doing than doing all of the other stuff that came with my job. So I was familiar with all of my crews, and anyone who knows me will know that is a fact. I spent a lot of time as a DO or group commander, whatever you call me, borough commander. I spent a lot of my time on station, sitting around mess tables. I knew the job really well, and that's a London Fire Brigade I don't recognise what's come out in the report. I know there are issues because I've been involved in disciplinary cases with issues of harassment and bullying. But if I'm honest with you, the biggest fear of all of my firefighters, I feel, was that they were, for a long time, I'm going back to when we all had to do the training to succeed course in the early 2000s, before the industrial action. That was the training to succeed course. Was we had to go to venues. They were generally football clubs for whatever reason. Back in Tony Blair's days, when the fire brigade had more money, they were hiring out speakers, and they were going to places like conference centres, football clubs, where you would have a room with about 12 varying ranks, varying stations, all sat around a room talking about misogyny, racism, sexism, and all of that, and how unacceptable it was. So I'm going back to around about 2000 now. So this is not a new thing. And really, honestly, the people in the London Fire Brigade, I felt their biggest fear wasn't putting the fire engine into the front of Woolworth shop window, wasn't not putting a fire out. The biggest fear was losing their job because of racism, sexism, misogyny, or anything like that. So when I say I don't recognise the London Fire Brigade that came out in that report, I genuinely mean that from the bottom of my heart. I'm not saying it didn't go on, but another analogy I would like to make, they've brought in a guy to look for a particular type of problem. And if you've got a beautiful garden, if you send a spider expert into that beautiful garden to look for spiders, they're going to find spiders. They're not going to notice the birds, the bees, and the pretty flowers, because
you're looking for things to support
they're not looking
your own
for that.
bias a little bit.
So, to a degree, I don't know the gentleman involved. I know he's a very professional at what he does. This came from the Mayor of London. It came down through London Fire Commissioner. But someone who is dealing with that, looking for that, then they're going to find problems with it. It's the reason why, if you buy a used car, you send the RAC guy around to do an RAC inspection, not for him to say, "That's a wonderful car, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, your wheel bearing needs changing. There's about 6 months left on the clutch and the car's been clocked." You look to find the problems. And that is the analogy I will give to that report, because it's been set up in spotlights, it's been shown in spotlights for all of its faults, but that is not the London Fire Brigade that I know for 31 years and that I continue to know. I was still doing a little bit of work. My company had a contract with Babcock's. So up until probably about a year ago, I was still, I know what me and you met through me teaching fire safety qualifications, but I did a little bit of teaching. I was doing a little bit of teaching back into the organisation nationally on the National Interagency Liaison course until last May. And then until about last March, I was still going into stations teaching a bit of fire safety. And so I'm not that far out of it, 5 years out of it. I'm still relatively recent.
Oh, mate,
in terms of
absolutely.
my
Anything that's
experience
from
with
within like
electronic.
2 to 5 years, this is where reports get a lot of their data from. So that, for all intents and purposes, is current day data. When I was reading through the data, it was the very, very small numbers of individuals interviewed versus the size of the whole thing. So that's when you can, and you can start finding those really extreme cases. But all in all, for me, I don't want to bang on about it, but it was just really, really sad to see, because I know LFB are going through loads of recruitment at the minute, as services are all over the UK, and I fear for the potential short-term careers of those individuals, not because they'll go in there and get bullied or anything like that, because they'll go in there and be around a pensive, nervous, tense, inhospitable, not because everyone's horrible, everyone's hostile, just because everyone's worried. If you create a culture of fear, then people don't share, they don't engage, they don't go the extra mile, they don't imbue their job, their career with the passion that you need to be a great, interesting firefighter, to have a strong, welcoming, supportive culture on a team. You won't get that if you're always got to look over your back, if you're always petrified of
That's right.
And the person writing down over there, or is that person recording this conversation on their phone? You'd be like, and that's like, I worry about that. I really genuinely worry about that.
Yeah, well, you've heard that they've seen little bits on social media. Is my daughter wanted to be a firefighter, but there's no way I'd let her now. I want to tell you something. I've got someone I speak to, someone who's helped me out with my book. A young lady. She's 40 now, so she's got another career. She's thinking about she wanted to be a firefighter, but she missed the opportunity in the late 90s. So she probably would have done around about sort of 20 years by now. But she's always supported the fire service. She was quite a big advocate of my book, and she did quite a little bit on trying to get me some publicity leads for it. She's 40, so she left school 22, 23 years ago. She still keeps in touch with one of her ex-school teachers. She passed me on a message that he sent to her a few weeks ago saying, I won't say her name, but saying, "Dear Dada, I bet you're really glad you never joined the fire brigade now. It seems like an awful..." So someone, all that 22 years later, got in touch with one of their ex-students saying, "You must be really pleased you didn't get in the fire brigade now." That is the damage. That's the damage there.
Yeah.
It's not about what might happen, what did happen, what could happen. It's the publicity damage. It's the fact that good people will take the wrong impression now, or good people will be put off from going it. So it is massively, if ever you said a steamroller to crack a walnut, forget the sledgehammer, let's bring in a steamroller to crack a walnut. That's what's gone wrong with this culture review.
Yeah, and I've heard similar things. People in London saying, "Oh, I wouldn't let the fire service in my home." You're like, "What? Why?" "Oh, I've heard they steal things
really?
from you, and they look through your drawers or some shit." I'm like, "No, they don't. No, not at all." Bullshit. And they'll say, "Oh, well, it says it in this report." I'm like, "You're right, okay." And I just, like you say, it's just those pieces that are just going to ring in people's ears, and also the timing of it just felt. I don't think the timing was malicious now that I look at the background of when it was first launched and stuff like that. But I don't know, it just doesn't read very well in your mind that comes out a couple of weeks before, news of industrial. I do actually want to ask you about things like industrial action, because this, for many people, is the first time they'll have ever really experienced this. Like we say, we've gone through so much turnover in the last 10 or so years. And it wasn't
Yeah.
until I was actually looking it up early. Do you know when the first strike was? Do you know when the first ever one was? Because it was 9 weeks long, the first one.
Oh, the 77 strike. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know,
77.
we
I never knew.
benefited.
I never even knew this. I never went back to look at that. They did 9 weeks
Yeah,
of
9 weeks
strikes from November to
to
January.
January
Wow.
77. Yeah. And I know people 10, so I joined 10 years after that, and I benefited from that pay deal. I mean, my first few wage rises were all around about 10%. I remember 87, 88, 89 to, I think so my first take home pay in 87 as an 18-year-old. So it went up after a couple of weeks because I turned 19. Then it went up after I left training. But the difference in take home between me starting was about 565 a month. Don't laugh, it was a long time ago. 565 a month was my first salary by 1990, because I remember it was when I bought my first house. It was 800 quid. So that's quite a good jump. When you look at, if you took that by any 3 years in the last decade, although that's not much in terms of money, when you look at the percentage jump, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it was
Going
colossal
from
because I was
500,
seeing it
five and
and
a
they
half
said
hundred
it was
quid a month.
like I can't remember, four. No, it wasn't. Yeah, I think it was like 4 grand. No, it was three. I'm looking at it. It was 3,700, which what the average salary was back in '77. But there's similar sort of
Yeah,
cases with
yeah,
like the challenges that we're going through now, because it was saying about how inflation was running at like 16%, and it had even been as high as 25%
yeah,
2 years before that. So the government were putting a pay like a ceiling on the public sector pay of 10%, which still,
yeah,
10% rises was massive, but they actually asked for 30% in '77.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they
yeah,
demanded a
yeah.
30% pay rise. But that's not too dissimilar from what I mean. Like, is it the train lines or the NHS asked for 19%? What did they ask for?
Yeah, they've got 19%. But interestingly, I saw the other day that the prison service union have been in negotiations with a private prison provider, and they have won without any industrial action. They've won an 18% rise for members in a private prison. So
Wow, that's a
it
lot.
just goes to show. I mean, I know what I earn now in business. I know that I've asked for significant rises to my daily rate, whatever I do. So all of the work I do has gone up considerably
Mm,
without any argument. I know that um, my wife works for an organisation that is it's a Quango basically. Again, I won't name it because it's
yeah.
not fair on her, but it's a it's privately financed, but it is a government organisation that's a fee charging organisation. They had a reasonable wage rise, but that was earlier in the year. But they've been given, all of their members of staff have been given a couple of grand cost of living bonus. And my two eldest daughters, um, they're graduates. They've both got good jobs. And they, they've one of them's got a law degree, a couple of degrees. The other one's got an English degree, so they are in professional jobs.
Mm,
But their wage rise is in the private sector. So a lot of this is being pitched private sector against public sector. So I'm now in the private sector.
yeah.
I know that I'm on good money, and I know that people in my family who are in the private sector are having no issues at all with they've had one of my daughters got a couple of kickback bonuses as if to say, we know we've given you a pay increase, and this is with inflation, but we recognise the price of gas and electric, blah blah blah. So there you go. There is another XXX amount, four figures, just to see you through this winter, because they're valued. So I don't accept it's the media. The media are pitching people against each other. They're pitching typically the private sector against the public sector. So while the people at the top are out there, and I don't like talking politics because it really it's just not good for me. It gets me
No,
upset.
I
But the
appreciate it.
reality is, we've got the elite, call them what you want. You've got the government in office at the moment, the elite, call them what you want. The richer getting richer. But basically, what they're saying is, you lot down there, you fight over the crumbs, and we're going to have it out the back door with the big sacks of money over our back. And that's what it looks like. When
Mm,
you look at the costs of some of the things with COVID, some of the cost of Brexit. Look at them in billions. You look at all of the billions that were wasted in the last couple of years. Even the results of the election and that disastrous budget cost the country, was it 40 billion or something?
40 billion, yeah.
40 billion.
40 billion. Yeah,
but you could fund every single public sector pay rise could be funded for something like £16 billion. And the difference is that money will go back into the economy, because if you get your nurses, your police officers, your teachers, your train drivers, or private, I know there's a slightly different dynamic to the train drivers thing, but let's keep this public sector. If you give all them public sector workers an extra couple of £100 a month, that's going to be going to Tesco. That's going to be going to Boots. That's going to be going to Fords when they get a new car. It will all go back into the country. It will help boost the economy. So I do not buy the argument of government, because it's a false argument. I'm not an expert and I'm not an economist, but I've read plenty about it. I've read some good economists who are saying, actually, if you want to stimulate the economy, give it to the people who will spend it. Because if you give, I've got nothing against bankers. I know some good friends. I go out at Christmas with some friends who are bankers. I've got a relative, a brother-in-law who's a stockbroker. But if you give them extra money, they will either invest it or buy another classic car, or
you won't see it back in the economy. No.
You probably won't see it back. Some might have a.
This is like the best way I would see as doing it, versus things like quantitative easing, where they would just try and inject money into the entire population, because that doesn't really work, and it tends to bring down the value of a lot of stuff. I mean, quantitative easing is a recognized tactic, so economists will argue that, I'm sure. But I agree with what you're saying, because let's call it what it is: blue collar workers, which we're now pretty much considering, and they're my words, not anybody else's. Blue collar workers that are doing first responder jobs and those in the emergency services. They do exactly. They live those lifestyles, like you've just been saying. They're not massively extravagant people. They like their community, hence why they work for their community. So they live in their community. They spend in their community. They put this money into local things, into local markets, into local incentives. The amount of people still in the emergency services struggling to put food on their own plate, going to run in food banks. They still donate money. They're still giving money to the Firefighters charity. They're still. Do you know what I mean? And that's what. You want to put money into that mindset as well. And also, like, I was looking across kind of globally to see, is this just a problem, or are we all sort of struggling with the same sort of thing? But where do you think the firefighters get paid the most, for example? Because I was having a look at some of these stats this afternoon.
I think I know when we went through this in 2002, so we've been here already. I think at the time I didn't look, but I looked. I know some places like FDNY were pretty well paid, but I think Santa Barbara, California, back in 2002, a qualified firefighter was earning $100,000.
Yeah, it's about similar now. So I converted them all into UK, because otherwise it was going to drive my head mine. But it's actually Switzerland. Fully competent. So we're not talking LFs, we're not talking substantive criminal firefighter. We're talking just competent firefighter wage, and they're on 80k in Switzerland. And I was like, wow. USA's a little bit more conservative. The competent firefighters there, this is an average across the whole of the country, is about 41. Canada sits pretty much exactly the same. Japan's a pretty big spectrum there. They can go from 19 all the way up to about 45, and Australia sits at about 41 as well. Whereas, here in the UK, we're, competent firefighter is at 32. If you're looking at the latest information on like the FBU's thing, for example, and it makes me think: don't we want to have these roles as something that people want to aspire to? Don't you want some of the best problem solvers, some of the most diligent people with high values in those kind of roles? But I don't know.
Well, like I said, both my older daughters earn more than just under or just over £20,000 more than that.
That's mad.
And they're both in their 20s. They've not got kids. One lives at home. One's got her own place. and that's it. That's it. You're saying a woman whose husband doesn't work, for example,
Mm.
who's a firefighter with a couple of kids, that's their main salary, or a man. I'm not going to go down. The dad, okay, dad might drive for, I don't know. Dad might have reasons. He does a couple of hours doing something or the other, but the main, the firefighter in the family, whether it's the husband or wife, is probably the main earner, and £32,000 isn't a lot of money.
Hey folks, just wanted to jump in with a quick piece around firefighter health and wellbeing. Whether you are trying to join the fire service and pass them tricky fitness tests, if you are currently serving, or if you are coming up to that next chapter of your life, retiring from the emergency services, we get so many different questions around it. So in partnership with Fitness for the Frontline, we have come up with a series of guidance and programs specifically designed to reflect the physical elements of the role of a firefighter. So whether it's carrying an LPP across an overgrown field, lifting a ladder above your head under running it, or wrestling with cutting gear for 30 plus minutes at some kind of complicated RTC, our bodies are required to lift, push, and carry objects in very specific circumstances. That is effectively what Fitness on the Frontline focuses on, as well as the longer term aspects of overall health and wellness for our firefighters. Now, we are definitely not about to be smashing out world records or getting that beach body ready in 6 weeks rubbish. The systems and programs that we put in place are adjusted for people's current fitness levels, and they're not a prescriptive way or a one-size-fits-all BS. It is very likely for myself personally that I'm still going to be a firefighter when I'm 60 plus, so longevity in the role is really important to me, and I know it is for so many people out there. It all starts with no obligation, 7 days worth of the programming, absolutely free. So whether you're joining, serving, or looking at the next chapter in your life, Fitness for the Frontline is designed by firefighters for firefighters. Now back to the show. I mean, when we were speaking about, the 77 ones, the 2002, 2003 actually had a big aspect of pension. There was a big pension aspect to that as well, wasn't there? Was that the extension of the pension, or was it not? Which one was that? No, that was 2013, wasn't it?
That was
the 2013 at the time, where the pension change comes, wasn't it?
Yeah, when the strike started, it was just about pay. But the result of that strike, that strike wasn't particularly successful. Let's be honest.
No.
It was.
What was it like? Sorry,
because
you were in during that. Obviously, the 77 one you came in just.
Yeah,
after
I
that.
was.
This was the first time you'd have been present for one.
Yeah, I was station officer. Stroke temporary ADO, so my substantive rank. So some of the I was temporary ADO. I busted back the station officer because I got the arse with it all, to be honest. So yeah, I was. It was. I was okay. I had to until that point. I'd always been doing a second job. I drove a London taxi. I drove a black taxi, and that's what made my family really. My wife always worked. I had a London taxi. It wasn't really until I became a substantive ADO in 2006 that I actually didn't have to do a second job. So it was a miserable time. Yeah, it was grim. No one particularly wanted to go on strike. There were a couple of people. Again, some people I worked with were more politician than firefighter, and still are to this day, although they're out of the service now. They were gagging for it, absolutely gagging for it. Most people didn't want to get involved in a strike.
Just help people understand, because obviously I'm only a sort of station officer, watch commander, whatever role that I'm at now. Is there certain ranks that are not allowed to strike? Because that's a common question that people get asked, and some people, a little bit more, a little bit less in the know, try and say that.
So at the time, it was up to SDO was still on the grey book. So, and that is still the same today. So London's different because you only go up as far as group commander, DO. What was a DO2? There was DO3, DO2, DO1. Then after a while, there was only DO3 and DO1. Long ago, they all became DO2s in London that then turned to group managers, which are now group commanders. The area manager rank that used to be senior division officer, that came about as a result of the changes that came out of the 2002 strikes. In London, they took them out of the grey book. There was a load of them. There was a few. I think there was probably about, let's say there was 15 senior division officers. 10 or 11 of those were near the end of their service.
Okay.
So what they said to them in around 2006, maybe after rank to roll came in, they said, we want to introduce a new rank, Deputy Assistant Commissioner. We're going to instantly put you on, those of you who are substantive, instantly we are going to put you on something like 10 grand more than you're earning as an area manager if you sign up for this, knowing full well that they were all about to leave in the next year or two. So of course the majority voted for it. There were 4 or 5 who were just on development as area managers, so they converted to DACs. My area commander at the time, who was made a DAC, he was an area commander. What had once been an ACO's job, so he had 20 odd stations.
Wow.
He got this. He went from area manager to DAC, but he was on development still. He essentially sat down with a top table and said, "What on earth am I going to have to do to get my full DAC rate?" And he was basically told, "You're never going to get there." They basically wanted them out of the grey book. They put them in onto new terms and conditions, give all the ones who were going a 10 grand rise. And so I don't know how that panned out because I was never interested in going for that last rank. Even in my last, the sort of offer was made to me probably a year before I went, in a roundabout conversation I had with someone near the top, said, "Steve, look, what do you think?" And I said, "I can't afford to do it because of the upper limit on the pension that George Osborne had brought in. I'm done now. I'm done. I'm where I want to be. If I become a DAC, I'm going to end up back at headquarters. You will own me. You own me enough anyway for 72 hours a week as a group commander, plus my ILO recall. But at least that ILO recall is for ops staff. The DAC recall is like, if someone's got a pimple on their backside and you need DAC cover, you're coming in to do that work." So I just weren't interested in that. But so as far as I know, is that the grey book goes up, includes area manager. Above that, so ACO, deputy chief officer are out of the grey book. They will not be involved in this action.
So they don't even have a choice. They don't have the right to refuse. They don't have the right to withdraw the labour anymore.
If I know there was a big thing about people being encouraged to leave the FBU around about 2010. A lot of officers left. A lot of those officers in LFB have retired now. And I think the balance of FBU officers, senior officers in LFB has come back the other way now. So there was very few of us left.
Wow.
I left at one point, but rejoined. I left over something because I used to be an FBU officers rep. There were a couple of people who were very vicious to me because I left the FBU, but I left the FBU over the counter-terrorism thing because I was a NILO, and it more or less come true with Manchester Arena. I remember saying, "So what you're saying is we're not going to respond to terrorism." No, that's right. So you're going to have young police women and young ambulance women and young policemen and young ambulance men down there, 21 years old, pulling bodies out of a terrorism scene, and you can have a load of very ass firefighters 2 miles away at an RVP not responding. Is that right? Yep, that's right. What happened at Manchester Arena? Pretty much that, didn't it?
Yeah, that's we're actually covering that one in a couple of weeks. It's a rough old.
Yeah, so I'm being very fast and loose, and I'm being very generic with that. But you hear where I'm coming from. My dispute with the FBU was because my wife always worked in Docklands at Canary Wharf, which was a terrorist hotspot. Both of my daughters, one by that time was working also at Canary Wharf. My other daughter was at university in central London. So all of my closest family, apart from my youngest daughter who was at school, were all working in terrorist hotspots, and yet we weren't going to respond to it. So I did leave the FBU from around about probably mid 2013, probably till about 2016. So I'm just putting cards on the table. I rejoined the FBU and I retired as an FBU member, and I've got out of trade membership. But I'm just saying, because I'm absolutely in everything I do and talk about, absolutely honest. So before we talk about this, I did have a period of time out of the FBU. Wasn't because of the bullying that was going on by FBU or by LFB officers to get people out of it, because that would have been like a red flag to a bull to me. There were a lot of people who were really happy when I left the FBU, because apparently people were saying, people running around the third floor saying, Dudeney's left the FBU, Dudeney's left the FBU, but it was for other reasons, and I rejoined anyway. But so put that to bed. But yeah, it was a really miserable time, because I remember having an argument at when I went back to station officer. There were some people on the watch. Most of the people on the watch wanted to keep the fire engines behind the door, so that if we got a running call, we would take them out.
Yeah.
There were a number of people on the watch who says, no, we want them out in the yard, backed up to the bay doors, put the keys in the safe. We shouldn't be doing it. On strike is on strike. I'm afraid I sit in the first camp. Well, like the ambulance unions have. You're on strike, but you've got I think you need the right to strike, because otherwise you become slaves.
Police can't strike, can they?
No, they can't. No, and that's
think,
that's
different.
Good, they're issued a warrant. It's a bit like the military, isn't it? They are crown servants, and that's ever so slightly different.
So you'd have had the goddesses in on that 2002, wouldn't you? Did you have the green goddesses in then?
Yeah. And it's amazing, because the army, the guys in the military then were going past picket lines and offering wanker signs and all of that, and it was because their senior officers were pitching them against us. But lo and behold, 20 years later, how many of those guys are now in the fire service or paramedics who are going out on strike?
So many retired.
So I've seen the arguments. I've seen a couple of social media arguments with a load of people in the military saying, "Oh, we're covering for this, we're covering from that." Read an interesting one on a website the other day saying, "Listen, kid, 21 years ago, I was part of Operation Fresco. I was in whatever the regiment was, maybe, let's say, for argument's sake, Royal Green Jackets. You weren't that. And I was doing it for the last 15 years. I've been in the fire brigade, and I will be going out on strike. Grow up when you've got a mortgage to pay and all of that." So, I don't want to pitch us against it. Thankfully,
no, God, no.
The military won't be standing in for the fire service this time. But that shows you the dynamic will change.
Do you not think
they're against the paramedics?
I think they will,
Sorry?
I saw in my role in the training department, we've already received a briefing that we need to prepare a plan to train military personnel. I actually did the same. No, I apologize. Sorry. They said a 48-hour plan to train a private sector fire service. And I forget if they said they were populated by. It wasn't the military, no. It's so we've got to come up with a plan just to do basic familiarization with them on pumps, but they won't be wearing BA.
No, so essentially the government turned around to the fire brigade because of the pension strike and said, "You want to be chief officer, it's your job to provide a fire service, we won't step in for you." What they're having to do with the military in the paramedic dispute is purely and simply down to the fact that they haven't been in dispute for 30 years. But you can guarantee that your NHS trusts after this will be told, you better provide it. So the fire brigade, that's why you've got this Capital Guard, which is the contract that London Fire Brigade have got, where they've got a load of people. They're always training them at Morton. Training for, and that's the last.
You think they're mostly just retired officers and stuff like that? Is it all the instructors from Morton? Because I'm interested if I notice anybody.
I believe. Yeah, well, I believe a lot of my, no, not a lot. I know the names of a number of former colleagues who I'm really surprised at, and I really don't want to talk to again, because basically they retired on very handsome pensions that were won by people going into dispute decades before that. So I understand the chief officers have got a job to do. I understand that if a guy hasn't got a job and someone's saying you can earn 500 quid a day being a firefighter, I don't like it, but I'll understand that. What I can't do is that someone who is now comfortably retired, there's a lot of money in the private sector for retired firefighters, particularly officers. If you have to find yourself going off to, and people will hear this, people I know will hear this, people who maybe know me will listen to this and think I'll never speak to him again. Well, good luck to you. I'm not going to name names, but there are people I know who are working for those services, and they really ought to be ashamed of themselves, because don't make it easy. I've heard the moral argument. One guy said, "Well, it's my moral duty." No, it isn't your moral duty. The moral duty is on the employer to not lead us into this position in the first place.
Yeah.
Don't say it's your moral duty. Don't give me that.
Yeah, that's just something to hide behind.
Can't see kids burning to death in their bed. No, it ain't about that. What it means is you're on £2 a day or whatever earth they pay you to be a pretend senior officer, getting off on going out in your car with a blue light to supervise these badly trained crews. I don't blame the crews.
No.
Because they're, they're not unionised. They're private sector employees, and they don't care about strike breaking. They tend to be the type of people, I believe, who work on doors or work as security guards.
Yes.
I've seen them down at the college. They tend to be of a type. So they're out for a fast buck. I don't blame them for that. But what I don't excuse, I don't blame the chief officers. The chief officer takes a job saying that you've got to provide a fire service in the event of pandemic or industrial action. I don't blame the chief officers or the senior officers. I don't really have much sympathy with anyone who breaks a strike. Who, if you're in another union, then it is what it is. That is what it is. But I would personally, I'd struggle with that. But people
how
who
successful
are
do you think it'll be in
out
terms
of the
of
job,
percentage of people that will? I know this. Feel free to. We can fuck this off and edit it out, whatever. But it's like it's always been difficult, and some people will say like, "Well, it was difficult back then. It's difficult now." And of course, the people of now might say, "I can't afford to strike." Some people will be saying that. People go into food banks already, 3 kids, whatever it might be, and when you say, "Mate, it's 4 hours or it's a day. We're striking for a day. It's going to be a couple hundred quid. That's all it's going to be." Some people will say they can't afford that, and that's my biggest fear. I'm not. Oh yeah, Peter runs podcast. I don't make any fucking money off the podcast. You know what I mean? I'm not laughing. I'm not rolling in the Benjamins. But it is always a very personal decision, and my fear is, what if we've got no teeth?
Yeah, so when I was at my poorest, I bought my house just before I was married. I bought my house when the interest rates were really high, and when the reason I spoke about my £800 take home pay in 1990 was my take home pay was my mortgage. So my wife back then was my girlfriend. Her money from the bank was paying the rest of our bills, and we were on our, we were broke. I remember scraping around money, getting money out of pots just to get a pizza one night because we'd worked so hard all week. I'd had a busy tour. I think I'd done a Monday, Tuesday days, Wednesday, Thursday night. She'd had a miserable week in the bank. Friday night, we didn't even have enough. I think we scraped together enough money to get one small pizza. I really clearly remember going into all the little. So I know what it's like to be fairly poor. We kept a roof over our head. We weren't on the streets, but I know what it's like not to have any cash. If you ask me the question, would the Fire Brigade Union have called a strike then? Would I have gone out on strike? Yes, I would have gone out on strike for the sake of my career, for the fact that I joined for the future, for getting on with people. So I don't know what people's personal circumstances are. My circumstances today are entirely different. I'm a relatively comfortable man there. I'm not going to deny that. I've got to that time in my life when the last thing I worry about now is money. But if someone has to make that decision, Pete, then I'm not going to judge them. I don't think they should. And in when I was in a similar position, I would have gone on strike. I don't think I would. I was very professional. I always wanted to be a firefighter. I loved being a firefighter, but you can't treat me as a slave.
No.
So you've got to have the right. You've got to have the right to withdraw your labour. I just hope I like what the ambulance service have done. I really
respected them for that. It's been so long for that. And my brother-in-law is a paramedic, and he does various other roles in there as well. And when I heard about that, I was like, fucking hell, good. It sounds harsh, but like, I felt they, more than anybody, I mean, we all got celebrated during the pandemic and all that sort of stuff, and all first responders really went over and above. But they really took it between the eyes, that one. That was a big kick in the nuts when there was a real hemorrhaging of appreciation as soon as everything was over. And, you'll know yourself from time on the front line, it's seeing the level of abuse and just, aggravation and assaults and stuff that's going on in with public to the NHS. When I saw that, I thought, wow, that's this is an indicator, because they have not, 30 years, was it they had a straw? Was it 30 years, something like that? Longer? I don't know.
Yeah, it was about that 80, maybe longer, 89, I think. I was in the fire brigade, so I'm sure it was 89 because we went on a march with them, the LAS. We marched through Bethnal. I was stationed at Bethnal Green, so it would have been 89 because we joined them on a march. We from our station. So that was the last time. So it's coming up to 34 years ago, the last time they were on
Do you
strike.
think services all listen to Matt Rack and stuff? Do you think people will join? The like unions will have, because they say they're having those discussions already, a strike alongside the NHS, or do you think that's a likelihood? If it's anything like what we're like, we're crap at talking to each other. But do you think that'd be effective? It'd be a hell of a thing to swing.
It would, I think I think it would. I just worry that there are that some of the voices that, and I'm not talking about Matt in particular, but I'm thinking that some. So I've known some people in the union who are they're more union people than they are firefighters, if you see what I mean. Yeah, I worry about some of the voices who are more worried about bringing down government. No, not that the government should be brought down. I think we need a general election tomorrow. This lot are absolutely hopeless. And again, I don't want to talk politics, but as a person who lives in this country, everything is absolutely screwed. You can't, I'm not even going out I don't generally ride my bike in the winter. But anyway, I'm not even riding my motorbike in case I have an accident, because I don't want to be laying on a road with a broken leg for 8 hours for an ambulance that isn't going to come. So everything is screwed. Everything is absolutely screwed. I'm begging, I'm praying that nothing happens to me or any of my close family. So don't tell me, I'm paying the money I've paid on gas bills and electric bills is eye-watering, and I'm actually I'm not looking for sympathy, but I've actually had to make some decisions about. I said to my wife, I said, do you know what, we normally go away in January. I said, do you know what, let's just not do that, because we're going to be paying an extra. I think we're going to be paying an extra. I've got it's a big detached house. At some points when the snow was down, we were doing like 30 odd quid a day.
Yeah. Ours went up
£31 a day. So if you do that by a month, that's 900 quid a month.
It was just obscene. And like you say, you just start trimming the margins everywhere. Little stupid things, as silly as it sounds, and people might roll their eyes, but like, Netflix, we cancelled Netflix, cancelled Amazon Prime, just silly little shit, but it all adds up. Do you know what I mean? We ain't using the dryer anymore. We have to dig out the clothes hangers and stuff like that. And every room you go in has got a clothes horse because you ain't banging the heat in. It's just like
because
I feel a bit stupid.
I've literally said
also like I'm a watch commander, so I'm like I'm not one of the least paid people in the services. I look out there and go, I'm not amazing, I'm not nothing, but if I'm making those decisions, I'm not starting on the first journey in the fire service, or I haven't decided to stay as a firefighter. No, that's what we need to be basing it on. So the challenge is those people which is the people we're working with.
Yeah, that's it. It's awful for lots and lots of people. Lots and lots of people are really struggling. Lots and lots of people I know are really struggling. So I don't know about food banks, because I'll be honest, I don't know anyone who's in the fire brigade who's been to a food bank, but I know lots of my former colleagues are working themselves to the bone in second jobs because they're just not pulling in the meat that they just can't cover. So I'm going to be ultra smug, sound ultra smug. I don't mean smug. I've made a decision not to go on holiday in January because I'm going to use that money to pay my gas and electric that I would have had a week away in the Canary Islands. Yeah. So there's going to be other people who are saying, I've got nowhere else to go with that. I've got no little alleys I can run down to pull in a few quid. So basically, I'm going to have to miss the mortgage payment this month to pay the electricity bill or something like that. And that's just not right for anyone. So getting back to my original point, do I want to bring the government down? No, I don't. But I think the government should go. I think that they've absolutely screwed the country. But when it comes to getting back to the original point, how should the FBU do the strike? I don't know. It's not my call anymore. They will have a good idea. They should work with other trade unions within the legalities of disputes, because you've got to be careful of frying secondary picketing and all of that. But should people go out of the doors on a fire engine? Yes, because that buys the public. I think that's important.
Yeah.
As a member of the public, watching those ambulance crews jump on the ambulance and have their fellow picketers cheer them as they went on a shout,
Yeah, man.
I think that would play very, very well in a fire service strike.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's
Someone,
kind of a
you
it's
got
kind
a
of a
call.
separate issue because fire service we do need and deserve to have a more reflective pay of the challenges that are being faced economically and also just the cost of living. But do you think that it's probably a completely separate issue actually, but I'm thinking like we do need to begin to look at other things. I mean, it's a conversation we had before around, should we be doing more support of things like the NHS, things that happened during COVID where we were, but then again, part of me feels like that would be turning our backs. Well, yeah, but I mean, like, would it be poorly timed now to say, oh, you know what, we'll do some of the NHS's work after they're just striking now? You don't want to be taking money off the NHS, off the paramedics, but we are such a small fry by comparison. We're nothing compared to the NHS. The fire service is
you're right. Yeah, that's right. We are cheap. We are cheerful. No one particularly cares about us because everyone has a fear of ill health. We all face it. Ultimately, we all die, and not many of us go to sleep one night at 92 and don't wake up in the morning. Most of us have got the requirements to use the health service. Everyone is scared of getting their car nicked or their shed broken into or their house burgled. So crime and illness happen to everyone. Fires only happen to other people.
Yeah.
That's the saying. Fires don't happen to me. No, I don't smoke, mate.
Yeah.
I'm
not an idiot. I'm not a moron. It wouldn't happen to me.
No, I ain't gonna happen to me. I've got all new stuff in here. What about them flats in Docklands? What are you talking about? What do you mean? yeah, like 12 years ago. Luxury apartments in Docklands, 3 of them burnt out because they had a range of built-in high market dishwashers that were all faulty, and it weren't until 3 of the 34 flats had proper burnouts that they thought, oh shit, all the dishwashers are defective. So don't tell me you can't have a fire.
Mate, I think about that with loads of them. See so much construction around the UK now.
55-inch Samsung that's
houses and stuff being built by the cheapest bidder, and I just think the amount of even just in the area that I live in, the amount of new housing estates getting popped up where they've not consulted with council on things like even just as stupid as like hydrant and water plans and stuff like that. And I'm like, what's going to happen when one of these catches fire? Because we don't know anything about some of these new estates. We've got less people. We've got less backroom staff in the fire service able to put together all these plans and update all of our systems. And I can't imagine it's just the same in fact, I imagine it's significantly worse in London because we said about it before, the amount of, renovations, changes to establishment, the amount of changes that just get done left, right, and center, new businesses, new apartments, new everything, and you just think there's just so many accidents waiting to happen. But like you said, it's always happens to someone else. It's not going to happen to me.
Not us, As a fire safety professional, private fire safety professional, I'm terrified at some of the things I see. Absolutely terrified. Awful. Yeah. I mean, there's times I walk out of businesses and I think I've had to have a phone call with someone and say, I'm tempted to ring the fire brigade. It's so bad, I'm tempted to ring the fire brigade. Because you get that professional argument. And I've walked back in and I've said to someone, you need to go out and you need to buy air horns now because if a fire starts, someone's going to die. You won't be able to get around. I'm not leaving. Do you understand me? Yeah, but I remember saying to this guy, go out, buy some air horns. Otherwise, I'm going to have to call the fire brigade. That's not what I'm paying you for. I said, I've got a duty. I've got a duty as well. I've got a professional duty. My name is going to go on this report. And if it all goes wrong, I'm not going to stand in court and defend you. I've had other people try and offer me bungs to write the report so it looks good. So it's terrifying what's happening out there in terms of fire safety. So, it's awful. So, but, do the fire brigade need to expand? When the time's right, I never wanted to be a paramedic.
I did, though, and that's where I think there's a generational shift.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people
joining now have got a bit of a hunger for that trauma. I love it. Yeah, I'd happily do it. I look at the American model and stuff like that, and I'm like, let's do it. But now we've said no to it for so long, I feel like there's certain people in different unions, I'm not just going to say the FBU, who are like, no, we're never going to do that. We've stuck this stake in the ground. We're not going to go back on it. And I'm like, fucking hell. But that's why, like, people like the FBU, bless them, and I support the FBU, remember the FBU, blah blah blah. They lost a lot of support when they were turning their backs on 24-hour shifts. Like, there was a lot of day crewing systems up and down the UK. That it really helped certain people's life circumstances. But I don't pretend to know. We'll have to get somebody from the FBU on to really help me out because I don't know. But there was a big no against that, and that lost them a lot of support as well. So that's why I don't know. I don't know what the output, what the reach of the unions is these days because people have been burnt.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's. I mean, we're a little bit. We look into certain glass boxes with mirrors reflecting back at us, so I don't get to hear. I only follow certain Twitter accounts from people who I follow FBU based accounts a lot of the time, so I only hear what I see, so I don't know really. I know there was a time before now where after I left where people were very, very anti FBU before all this cost of living crisis started. So I don't know what that looks like.
I think it was like 6 years ago. I know it was when some of the 24-hour stuff was happening, and there were something on European
and there were
laws and work time regulations. It was another year. Was it the CFR one? What was the? There was another union that started getting a lot of traction.
Fire Officers Association. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it was that one, wasn't it?
I think remember. I just remember.
A lot of people aren't in a union at all, and I'm just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, so I don't know. So I don't know what that looks like now. And like I said, because I'm looking through down only into glass boxes that only reflect certain things back at me, then I really don't know what that looks like today in terms of would they get the vote? Would everyone get? It's a different generation, God help me, some of the people joining the fire brigade now are young. They're the age of my youngest, so they're more than a generation. My kids are sort of nearer 30 than 20. So some people joining the fire brigade are going to be younger than my kids now. So it's really difficult for me to understand what that looks like for young people. And so I don't know. Once you take me out of London and you go to services where there's only 2 or 3 whole-time stations, I just don't know what that would look like in terms of strike action, in terms of a vote, what the vote looks like. I don't think it certainly won't be a 1977 because there wasn't an appetite for a 1977 back in 2022 because people didn't have. Everyone had a mortgage almost. In 1977, not as many people had mortgages, and things were a lot cheaper. So they very bravely did. And I knew people who never got over the 77 strike.
Really,
I knew people who were poor when I joined and were always scraping around and never got over the 77 strike up until they retired in the early 2000s. So I'm talking specifically about guys who joined in their 20s, in the mid 70s, were just getting on their feet when that strike happened and had a couple of kids. When I first knew them a decade later, they were as poor as church mice. And even when they retired in the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, they never really got over it. And the first little break they got was when they got their lump sum in 2004. So that was a bad strike, 77. I benefited from it. I was the generation who really benefited well from it. And that's why anyone who breaks a lot of my generation who are now working for these companies, that's just not on, because people who were before us, really, I'm not getting emotional, but it's my voice just before everyone thinks, because I've had this horrible cold, my voice is getting croaky. We've been talking a while now, but so I know people who really struggled. We didn't struggle so much in the 2003 strike. I did a couple of 24-hour picket duties. We broke into watches, although, like I said, I was acting up ADO. I went back to my station on my watch. I did the place I was station commander. I did a couple of picket duties there. But I basically went back to Poplar Fire Station, which is where I was White Watch Station Officer on paper. And each watch did a 24-hour one. So that gave you 3 clear days off. and I was out in the cab. I was out in the cab working on the days off, so my family didn't struggle. So, the 2002, 2003 strike weren't as bad as that 9-week strike, but boy, did we benefit from that 9-week strike more so than we did with the 2003 strike, because there was a saying at the time. I used to say, it was just a bit of a running joke. Everyone I met with, I'd say after the 2003 strike, I'd say, that's it, the job's fucked. And people still say that to me now. Every time something goes wrong, they quote that back to me. And someone who's just become an ACO in another brigade from London spoke to him the other week on private messaging. And I went, hope you settle well into the new job. And his reply was, capital letters, job's fucked. So, but it did to a degree. Everything that happened post that 2002, 2003 dispute, we lost the upper quartile pay agreement that they said was no longer working. We went rank to roll, and now lots of places are going back to rank. The fire brigade got over politicized. We had regional control. It's been a shit show ever since, hasn't it? Regional control.
It's more challenging. Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, I've got 20-something years left invested in it, so I always try and keep that optimism kindled. And I say this to people all the time. It's like, you don't get to choose your challenges. We all romanticize the challenges that Steve and people before you faced, 20, 30 years ago. Oh, it was different back then. And, everyone stuck together. Well, you know what? They're not your fucking challenges now. These are our challenges today. So you're going to have to be a different sort of problem solver. You're going to, you know what? I'm sure they said the same back then. The same as you've said many times before. People would always say the same about the people 20 years before them. So these are our challenges. And we need to be the people that in 15, 20 years, people tell the story about us and go, fucking hell, yeah, they had it really hard, but actually they did stand together. They did pull together. They did look after each other, brothers and sisters. Because otherwise, is it going to be us where people talk about it and go, that was the shittest time the fire service went through? I don't want to be part of that. I want to be, and that's the whole point with the podcast. I don't romanticize the sector, but I try and get voices like yourself, people that are respected, people that are inspiring, and people that people look up to. And I think this is what we can still be. We can still be part of this, but you've got to, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. You've got to want to make it better. If we just focus on the bad shit, it's a horrible place to be.
Yeah. And that, people need to see it as a career again, because it can't just be a job. If it becomes a job and people are in and out the doors, leaving after 5 years, you'll never get that all important experience and memory, because this is a job where, how many firefighters does it take to change a light bulb? It takes 12. One to change a light bulb, the other 11 to say how good the old light bulb used to be. That is the way to sum up the fire service. It's all about tradition and history, and that's what the book did. This podcast needs to do is actually, we say best job. Loads of people say best job in the world. I say firefighting, best job in the world. Of course, I'm biased. But you need to bring a little bit of that love back. You need to have a fight. Every generation has to have its fight. And we had a fight. My generation had a fight. I'm going to qualify what I said before by saying the 15 year I did, that was about halfway through my career. The 15 years before that, I felt things were a lot better, a lot professional, and had a lot less external interference than the next 15 years after that. So that's what I mean when I said the job was fucked and the job changed. The job being fucked was, pardon my French, was a bit of a, it's a bit of a loose joke. But did the job change? Yes, it did. Did it change for the better? I'd argue not, because a lot of the things have come round. How are we a broader service as a result of that? By Christ, we are. Yeah, all of the stuff now, line rescue, water rescue. So we need to make ourselves the emergency service again.
Yeah.
The emergency service.
Yeah, man. 100%.
Go out and some of the things about not doing shutting lifts and not going to AFAs, I don't even think that's such a good idea, No. No one sees a fire engine anymore.
Yeah.
It's good. They're available if there's a real fire. But you know what? Turn them out to the city centre AFAs. I personally, I always struggled with that concept of the chief saying, yeah, we're going to, because we were like turkeys voting for Christmas. Cool challenge. We don't need to go on that AFA. All of a sudden, now we've had a fire service that we've lost how many? So in London, we lost how many firing? 27 pumps, 10 fire stations shut, thousands less firefighters than we had a couple of decades ago because we got quieter, because we stopped going out to shut-in lifts. We stopped going out to AFAs. The Xbox generation changed the dynamic. So when I was when I was a young firefighter, we were going out to so many rubbish and car fires because kids played in the street. Kids don't do that anymore. You can't really change that, but we are going to get busier. That's the royal we. It isn't my we anymore. But in the fire service, you are going to get busier with grass fires in the summer. You know, that's a challenge. We need to start attending other incidents and doing more stuff, because the bad fires have remained consistent. Little fires have gone away. Thankfully, fatal fires are down, but you know, you're never going to get the back bedroom fires of Moss Side and Peckham and the Gorbal, Govan and Kirkby and Merseyside. All of those back bedroom fires. Have I left any big cities out? Wolverhampton, you know, all of those back bedroom fires that my generation grew up on. You're probably not going to get them again, but you're going to be going to lots of different stuff. But do it, make it, because it's so good being busy. I used to love being busy.
I think we are going to see a bit of a rise. I mean, we've seen a bit of a rise over the last year anyway, as people have come out of COVID and lost their brains, but also just going into this period of austerity, people trying to cut corners and trying to save pennies in the house. People make mistakes. People, you know, trying to, a lot of people just relighting their blooming fires that they haven't done for 10 years. They're now trying to burn wood that they find in the garden. You know, the amount of chimney fires and stuff that have massively increased over this winter has been colossal in certain services.
And watch this space for lithium-ion battery fires. That is going to be. So we had the paraffinators in the 60s and 70s. Kids were dying because of paraffinators. You know, I remember seeing a fire in the street behind my house, in Arbor Square, where I lived when I was really young, up until I was 9. I remember I can still see it. I can play it like a picture in my mind. I can still see a couple of pumps in the street, a hose reel off, a little bit of white smoke out the window. I knew the family who lived there, and I remember my mum and dad talking about a paraffinator getting knocked over. No one died, thankfully, but the amount of kids who were killed in paraffinator fires in the 70s, and then in the late 80s, we had all of the the first Christmas I did in the job, Christmas 87, there was a rush of fires where children got killed because of foam furniture fires, which saw the new foam filled furniture and soft furnishing regulations came out as a result of that. Watch this space for revisit this podcast. Watch this space for lithium-ion battery fires, because they're everywhere, and you've got cheap. So the original batteries are going out of service now. People are buying a £2 special off of a well-known website where they can get cheaper imports. And you are going to see, if you look at my Twitter feed for earlier on in the year, I got 2 big follows this year. One of the ones was when I went to a fire where a guy it's in the book actually, where a guy lit up a cigarette. He was filling up his car with a petrol container and it wasn't sealed, and he lit up a cigarette and he burnt himself in really badly in the car. And I turned out to it as station commander. And luckily I turned out on my own because it was an ordering. But I nearly beat the pump there because they were out on the ground somewhere. And the other one was a tweet I put up, I can't remember, February time, about what looks like a house fire in a backdraft, but it's a load of little mini backdrafts. And I looked at it. It came from an ex-colleague who said, "Steve, I've tried to get LFB to pick up on this, but they won't. You've got quite a good Twitter following. Would you publicise this?" And it does. It just puffs in and out. And people are saying, "What is that? Is that a load of little backdrafts?" But it was actually it was the thermal runaway going from one battery cell to another, causing a load of mini. I don't know. Did you see that on
yes, I did. Yeah, another one you're talking about.
Yeah. So that is going to be,
and they're just been using everything. Like you say, all these little scooters, all of these little electric bikes. There's loads, and like you say, everyone that had their smartphones, anything up to sort of 10 years ago, and they're now sat in the back of their house, or they're giving them to their kids because they want them to use them for their first phones, and the batteries are just not fit for use anymore. that's where we're having that lag effect of so many things. And just like the explosion of electric cars, and we're starting to see a lot of garages trying to stay in their sector by becoming electric car service places when they really don't have the knowledge or the ability to do it. And also the construction of some of these vehicles has been a little bit rushed as well, as we're all trying to sprint towards this zero emission stuff. So yes, mate, there is and again though, people, you want the fires of old. You want, but I want the big stack fire, or I want the the big industrial estate fire. Well, they were just the fires of then, and these are going to be the problems of now. These are going to be the next generation's problems. So, you don't get to pick your problems, but you've got to adapt and become the solution, I suppose.
Yeah, without a doubt, and that's the future. But let make it a really positive future. I mean, like I said, I'll do it all again tomorrow. I love coming on here and talking about stuff in the old days and the history. But it's also important that we carry that forward, because it like I said, it's still, in my opinion, biased as it is, the best job in the world. You get through this cost of living crisis, adapt the fire brigade to be a proper fire and rescue service, a proper emergency service. So you have to start, dinosaurs like me, there's no time for us anymore. You've got to accept that you're going to be picking Granny up if she falls over in a hallway. And why not? That's an emergency service. You can't be exclusive. We were able to be exclusive because we had the exclusivity of having enough fires to deal with that. But you open up the side of a fire engine now, it's got everything on it. It isn't just hose now. We had a little locker with a little bit of special service equipment in it. And then a couple of years later, we started getting the whole metro. But everything in those lockers were hose and firefighting stuff. J adapters, K adapters, various types of branches. You look at a fire engine now, you've got one firefighting locker, really, haven't you?
Yeah.
And then with the hose and that in, the rest
everything
of it
else
is for that.
Trauma,
so
RTC, water rescue, rope rescue.
Yeah.
It's everything in between.
And so it should be, yeah. And I also think we need to probably be a little bit. Did you see that rescue in New York just before Christmas, where the guys wrote down from the flat above to rescue someone out of a burning flat?
I've seen a few of those over the past couple of months.
So there was the famous one involving Paddy Brown and all of those back in 1991, the Times Square rescue. But basically, there was a flat fire maybe about 5 or 6 weeks ago in FDNY, and I'm on a chat group with some XLFB counter-terrorism people and some FDNY counter-terrorism people. We've got a little WhatsApp group, and it come up on there. I'll see it, and we said, "Do you know what? We wouldn't have done that. We wouldn't have been able to do that. Why not? Why shouldn't we?" They literally got their life ropes, got to the flat above the fire. It was above the reach of an aerial ladder. They were trying to get into the flat to do the firefighting. It was a wind-driven fire, and they literally went to the flat above, popped out the window, stuck a couple of firefighters out who pulled the women out of the window, lowered them down to the floor below, because it's easier to go down than go up. And I thought, you know what? In the British Fire Service, the brave, the courage is there to do it.
The courage is there from the firefighters and the LFs and the sub-officers, but I just think some people would be petrified, and their risk aversion and how they might look and how it might come across in the press would stop people from would stop great firefighters doing from what they're desperate to do and what they do have the capacity to do. We have the kit, we have the training. People are capable and competent to do that. Yeah,
but they don't, and that's it. And I look at, so America's a good and a bad example. It's good because they are unshackled. It's bad because occasionally they just go mad. I've had lots of really interesting debates with good friends who are firefighters in the US, and they just don't get my point of view. I say, but we put the fires out. We rescue lots of people. If you look at global rescue figures from fires, the UK are up there. The UK have got among the highest rescue survivability from fire rate. So actually, a lot of what you do isn't valid, and you can't criticise us if we really stood outside and poured water on from the outside and didn't rescue anyone, like some people in the US Fire Service suggest. Our rescue from fires figures would be really low, but actually, we've got some of the best numbers in the world. I can't remember the percentage. It might be 86%, but it's a real successful number of people who are alive when the fire service arrive. 86% of them get rescued from the fire and survive. It's that metric. If they're dead before we get there, they're dead. But Paris are really aggressive as well. If you ever look at Paris, the Sapeurs Pompiers du Paris have got their own website or the YouTube channel. They are fantastically aggressive. So they're European. They fall under European regulations and laws. I know they're a military fire service, but it's a little bit of that I think we need to get back to. It's become a little bit too cuddly for me, if I'm honest, a little bit too risk averse. Some things I've seen some LFB footage this year, and frankly, I wasn't happy watching it. It was like people were washing walls with jets. And I don't blame the firefighters, because I know the firefighters would have been really shouting, but there are potentially some command officers there that didn't actually know what they were doing, because if they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't have crews washing down concrete clad walls. So I do think that's something else we need to. There's a lot of focus going on the political side, rightly or wrongly. We've discussed the review. Do we need to get back to a little bit more, just get a little bit sharper with our aggression? I think we do. We need to be a little bit more offensive.
I agree. And that ultimately,
some brigades are very good at it.
Think about, like, when I say to people controlling the controllables, when we're all trying to, make for a better fire service moving forwards, it's know what's within your sphere of control. So just going to work, and just trying to get involved with your crew, trying to be innovative with your training, appreciating you're not going to be able to affect the policy at the highest possible level. Your vote will count in the FBU, but it might not be the one that tips the balance. But what you can do is, influence things within your own sphere, within your own little universe, on your station, on your watch, whatever your position might be, rather than pissing and moaning about what's happening at a government level, which we can all do, and we can all be guilty of that, and we all have our own say. But if you're not an enjoyable person to work with, if people don't want to be on your watch, they don't want to be on your station, they dread the next shift they spend with you, that's the biggest way that you can influence the people's experiences of the fire service. Go in there and try and enjoy what you do. Do aggressive training, enjoy the time that you're on station.
Be professional.
Be professional.
I'd say, I'd say if I turned up on a station and people were sitting there playing on their mobile phones, and and I thought they were quite junior in service, I had no embarrassment in saying, "You happy reading that phone now? Oh, sorry, Governor. What? Well, why aren't you out doing knots and lines or something?" And they'd look at me as if I was like, "You old prick." But actually, it's what I did. I didn't have a mobile phone to play with, back in the late 80s. But I would do locker drill. You'd do stuff like that. I'd be expected. It would be expected of me. And I think, some of that needs to come back. A little bit of that, a little bit of that pride. And like I said,
I always use a comparison with that. I don't know if it's something we discussed before, but I always use a comparison of the military, because people always say to me, the jobs are hemorrhaging and we don't get as many as we used to. And, I know firefighters in the job 10 years and they haven't worn BA. I'm like, do you know what percentage of the military actually deploy in an operational environment and actually have contact? It's less than 8%. Less than 8% of the military will actually, I think it's something like only 20% ever actually deploy to an area of conflict. And of that 20%, like 12% of it, or like 12% out of the whole 20%, if you know what I mean, is like admin and support staff and all that sort of stuff. It's only a very small percentage will actually ever attend an operational conflict and actually be within that area. Whereas you look at the fire service, the calls may have gone down and all that sort of stuff, but you are far more likely to be required to demonstrate your skill sets than, and even when you speak to paramedics and stuff like that, so many of them don't get to attend trauma. They're usually going to Sally sat in a living room because she hasn't got a medication, or she's something wrong with her eye, or she's got a weird little rash on her bum.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
We have still got the best of so many of these slices of pie. So fucking wind your neck in and get out there and be really great at what you do, because you're still far more likely to attend the interesting and the sexy bits than most of the first responders, and probably even some people in the military. So, that's when people say, "Oh, but it's not as many jobs as we used to." Fucking still be good at what you do, because you are going to be called upon it at some point.
Yeah, you are. When LFB had the co-responding trial a few years ago, it's more than 5 years now because it's probably 7 years ago now. There was
Yeah.
about three different boroughs, three or four boroughs that did it in London. Newham was one of the boroughs, so Stratford, Plaistow, and Silvertown had been closed. So Stratford, Plaistow, and East Ham were the three East London boroughs that run the co-responding trial. Stratford actually got flagged up from LAS, who were supervising the trial. LAS said to LFB, "We think that your guys from Stratford need a break because they're getting so many Cat 1 or Cat Red, whatever they are,
Yeah.
like cardiac arrest calls, that they're seeing more in a week than a lot of our paramedics do in a year. You need
Yeah.
to give them a break," because it was all they were going to. Because I think advanced paramedics, the ones who tend to go around in the cars, they're the ones who see and therefore have, and I might be talking out of turn here because I'm not an expert, but from what I understand, the advanced paramedics are the ones who are going to those calls all of the time. But actually, most of your paramedics, like you say, they're going to toothaches, belly aches, all wasteful
Yeah.
calls,
Yeah,
but their
absolutely.
actual working jobs are few and far between. And
No, you're
that's
right.
why,
Because my
I
that's what my
think,
brother-in-law does. So they ride around in their own car, and they'll go and do a team leader role there, or they'll go and be the interagency liaison officer, talking to fire service and police at the sexy RTCs, at
yeah,
the trauma, and then you'll have your flying doctors and stuff like that who will also attend. But no, you're right. Most of the time, your paramedics aren't attending all of that stuff. So you've still got it a lot better than other people. So before we as firefighters sit there and go, oh, it's shit, and we're only going to this and that and the other. Think about what police officers are having to attend. Standing around a
yeah, God help me,
domestic,
yeah.
or well, if someone's had an argument with a neighbour, and you're there filling in paperwork for fucking hours because someone's taken down a fucking fence panel or something like that. You're not having to go to that sort of
Yeah,
shit.
yeah.
So, when you're standing there with your other first responders, you've still got it really good. So stop bitching and moaning about it. But no, mate, I really
Definitely.
appreciate
Yeah.
that. And I always appreciate your time. I always love catching up with you because it always helps me reinvigorate and
Thank you.
remember what an incredible sort of thing this is part of. And it touches base with me about all the history that we have in it as well. So I'm going to I'm going to sort of round us up there because I know you've got a bad voice and
No,
I appreciate you giving an hour and a half of your time.
no
But
problem, mate.
I'm
That's
so glad it's been
absolutely,
so successful, the
you're
book.
welcome.
I know we've had loads of people asking because we're recording on the 2nd of January for people that are unaware because this will come out probably in a few weeks' time. I had a few people here messaging yesterday asking because we haven't put out the January giveaways yet. We had a month off in December. So I know we've got a couple of people that are bringing books out and stuff like that, but we're going to do another giveaway with yourself and a couple of other people. And we're bringing back the hikes, footwear and stuff like that. So for people that are listening, I have slightly forgot just because it's been busy over Christmas, but we are going to be bringing it out again because I know people have been trying to get hold of the book.
Cool. Yep. I'll order some more in then.
Beautiful. All right, my friend.
Pete, take care, mate. It's been great to talk.
Send my love to the family, mate, and I really, really look forward to speaking again soon.
Right. All the best, mate. Take care.
Firefighters podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continuing, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.